We start the final chapter of The Church of Our Fathers by Roland H. Bainton, and chapter 23 is called Freedom's Holy Light. Well, without the freedom to choose one's spirituality, what merit is there to it? The example of Rhode Island and the separation of church and state began to be followed by other colonies in the year of the Revolutionary War. The Virginia Bill of Rights said that religion or the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of discharging it can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. And therefore all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, and that is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity towards each other. When the colonies formed in the United States of America, the Constitution declared that Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So any attempt to regulate marriage, except for stopping abuses and holding to material terms of the contract, would be a violation of that principle. And obviously people are allowed to pray wherever, but they're, reasonable breaks. Reasonable, taking off for a sermon once a week, but that was, implied. For everybody, not just Christians, but people act like, oh, only the taking Sundays off. It's like, okay, that's not it. The Constitution, however, did not say that the individual states must do the same, and some of them continued for a time in the old ways. In my life, some of the blue laws have been lifted. And there are still, non-Christian faiths still have a disadvantage in terms of what practices and buildings they are allowed to have. In the early years of the 19th century, however, the church and state came to be separated everywhere in America. No one church is anywhere favored more than another. The Civil Rights Act of 1967 in the 20th century kind of solidified a lot of that. Every church and every man and woman is free to worship God in the way that seems right. Separation of church and state does not mean, however, that the United States is not interested in religion. There are chaplains in the National Congress and in the state legislatures. Sunday, Thanksgiving, and Christmas are legal holidays. Lands and buildings used for church purposes pay no taxes. American coins bear the words, "In God we trust." When Theodore Roosevelt was president, he thought that coins were not the best places for religious mottos and tried to have them taken off, but Congress refused. It's disrespectful to have to God to have religious sayings and things that would be exposed in the bathroom or put to filth or, The United States, that's how the so-called ISIS flag is not an Islamic State, is that they wouldn't take it off to war if it had religious sayings, if it was an Islamic State. Roosevelt was president. He thought that the coins were not the best places for religious mottos and tried to have them taken off, but Congress refused. The United States has welcomed its shores those of all faiths, and because of the separation of church and state, they have been able to settle freely in any part of the country. Some of the groups have become strong because of the numbers arriving from abroad. Others have sprung up on this side of the water. All the churches have meant much to American life, and now other religions are, rather than losing, are gaining both in birth and in conversion. And specific churches, people are switching specific churches. Now the movement is towards Catholic when it was towards Protestant in terms of people converting from one to the other. The Lutherans in the early period did not come up in large numbers. The Swedes on the Delaware were but a small group, and the colony soon passed to the English. In the latter years, the German Lutherans came in larger groups and formed strong settlements, especially in Pennsylvania and still later in Missouri. It was the Scandinavian Lutherans who formed the backbone of Minnesota. The Catholics increased at first mainly because of the misfortunes of Ireland, which had grown more and more attached to the Roman Catholic Church, out of hatred for the misrule of Protestant England. Other disasters, such as war and famine, drove the Irish to seek a home abroad during the 19th century. Waves of Italians and Poles came to this country, and they too were for the most part Catholic. The Methodists were here before the Revolution. The ship shown on page 210 sailed with some of them in 1760. Philip Embury, founder of the First Methodist Church in the States, is shown preaching from the deck. The Methodists were not in time to found a colony, and that was probably an advantage, because arriving late, they were everywhere, while Congregational, Presbyterian, and Baptist ministers lived in personages. Methodists lived in saddlebags, on horseback, like John Wesley. They covered the coast from Georgia to Maine, and when the West was opened, far across the plains. A glimpse of the travels and preaching of George Whitefield in this country is given by a farmer of Middleton, Connecticut. He writes, "Now it pleased God to send Mr. Whitefield into this land, and my hearing of his preaching at Philadelphia, like one of the old apostles, and many thousands flocking after him to hear the gospel, and great numbers were converted to Christ," or at least that form of Christianity. "I feel the Spirit of God drawing me by conviction." In other words, he was emotionally okay with it. "I longed to see and hear him and wished he could come this way, and I soon heard he was come to New York, and the Jerseys and the great multitudes flocking after him under great concern for their souls, and many converted, which brought on my concern more and more, hoping soon to see him. But I next heard he was on Long Island, and next to Boston, and next to Northampton, and then one morning, all on a sudden, about 8 or 9 o'clock, there came a messenger and said, Mr. Whitefield preached at Hartford and Wethersfield yesterday, and is to preach in Middletown this morning at 10 o'clock. I was in my field at work. I dropped my tool that I had in my hand, and I ran home, and ran through my house, and had my wife get ready quick to go and hear Mr. Whitefield preach at Middleton, and ran to my pasture for my horse with all my might, fearing I should be too late to hear him. I brought my horse home, and soon mounted and took my wife up, and went forward as far as I thought that the horse could bear, and when my horse began to be out of breath, I would get down and put my wife on the saddle and bid her ride as fast as she could, and not stop or slack for me, except I bade her, and I so would run until I was almost out of breath, and then mount my horse again, and so I did several times to favor my horse. We improved every moment to get along as if we were fleeing for our lives. All this while fearing we should be too late to hear the sermon, for we had 12 miles to ride, double in little more than an hour, and we went round by the upper parish, and when we came within half a mile of the road that comes from Hartford, Wethersfield, and Stepney to Middletown on the highland, I saw before me a cloud or fog rising. I first thought off from the great river, but as I came near the road, I heard a noise, something like a low rumbling thunder, and I presently found it was the rumbling of horses' feet coming down from the road, and this cloud was a cloud of dust made by the running horses' feet. It rose some rods into the air over the tops of the hills and trees, and when I came within about 20 rods of the road, I could see men and horses slipping along, and in the cloud-like shadows, and when I came near, it was like a steady stream of horses, and their riders scarcely a horse more than his length behind another, all of a lather and afoam with sweat, their breath rolling out of their nostrils in a cloud of dust every jump. Every horse seemed to go with all his might to carry his rider to hear the news from heaven to the saving of their souls. It made me tremble to see the sight of how the world was in a struggle. Jihad is an Arabic word for struggle. I found a vacance between two horses to slip in my horse, and my wife said, "Law, our clothes will be all spoiled. See how they look." For they was so covered with dust, they looked almost all of a color, coats and hats and shirts and horses. We went down in the stream. I heard no man speak a word all the way, 3 miles, but every one pressing forward in great haste. And when we got down to the old meeting house, there was a great multitude. It was said to be 3,000 or 4,000 people assembled together. We got off from our horses and shook off the dust, and the ministers was then coming to the meeting house. I turned and looked towards the great river and saw the ferry boats running swift forward and backwards, bringing over loads of people. The oars rowed nimble and quick. Everything, men, horses, and boats, seemed to be struggling for life. The land and the banks over the river looked black with people and horses. All along the 12 miles, I see no man at work in his field, but all seem to be gone. When I see Mr. Whitefield come up on the scaffold, he looked almost angelical, a young, slim, slender youth, before some thousands of people, and with a hold of undaunted countenance.